Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first virtual town hall meeting. And thanks for taking the time to join with us today. And I will apologize in advance for any technical issues that we encounter along the way. We'll be learning as we do this. With me today are Robin Denage, who will be acting as moderator, and Lisa de Soto, who is the town CAO. And I'll note for those of you that are listening in that I don't have a teleprompter, so please bear with me. I may ramble off from time to time as I'm wont to do, but I'll be trying hard to remain succinct. So I know that these past weeks have been really stressful for all of us. We're all going through something that none of us have experienced before. We've had to adjust the way that we interact with our friends and our family. We've canceled plans. We're worried about our parents and grandparents and about our children and grandchildren. Many of us have lost jobs or have had to close our family businesses temporarily. But hard times call for the best of ourselves. And I am totally confident in the resilience of our citizens. We have always rebounded by leaning on each other, supporting our friends, neighbors, and local businesses, and by remaining positive. Now is not the time for anger or casting blame, no matter how anxious we feel. Instead of making judgments about each other, I encourage us all to come from a place of understanding. At the end of the day, we're all in the same human community, and we're all in this together. Now, today's town hall is a chance for us to come together as a community in the face of uncertainty. It's a time for you to ask questions, and I hope that you will leave with a better understanding of what the town of Kenmore is and is not doing at this time. I hope that even though you may not agree, you will stand with the town as we address the ongoing situation. Now, before we begin, I'd like to highlight some of the actions that we have taken in response to COVID. We continue to implement initiatives that align with the guidance that we receive from both provincial and local health authorities. It's worth noting that our region has an extremely low incidence of identified cases of the virus. As Dr. Wickham, who's Chief of Emergency at the Kenmore Hospital, reassures me every week, we're doing very well here in Kenmore. As of today, we're down to 2 cases from a high of 17. We are listening to the concerns of our residents, but we cannot make decisions based on emotion and fear. We need to continue to follow the guidance that we receive from experts. Dr. Hinshaw and other provincial authorities continue to discourage non-essential travel, as does the town of Kenmore. However, traveling between communities has not been prohibited by any authority. So to be clear, we are not blocking any entrances to Kenmore at this time, as there is no public health order directing us to do so. We believe that we must balance personal rights with public health, and we have been told this directly by the province. We are discouraging visitation, and I've been working at every opportunity with regional media to discourage day visitors, and we have installed signage at the main entry points with the same goals. We have installed no parking and local traffic only signs along roadways in residential areas adjacent to major trailheads. We are supporting the needs of our families, of our community. We launched a family resource network to support our regional families with free programming. And we opened a community call center to respond to questions from the public. As well, we are supporting local businesses with a new online support hub with weekly free webinars and resources. And we are taking action to help our community financially in many ways. Residents and businesses can defer tax and utility payments until at least the end of June. The Finance Committee recently directed administration to prepare amendments for the 2020 operating budget for Council to consider as soon as possible. Under consideration will be one thing that we'll be considering is reducing the municipal 2020 tax requirement to the same level as last year. We'll be looking to tighten departmental budgets without reducing essential services. And we'll be planning for specific initiatives to bring help to those residents and businesses who are most affected by this crisis. We made the very difficult decision early on to reduce staffing levels at the town of Kenmore, and 40% of our workforce have been impacted by these layoffs. This includes a range of casual, part-time, and full-time staff. We've also increased the funds available in the tax stabilization reserve to $4 million in order to help fund some of our COVID-related initiatives. Now, I'd like to open today's conversation. I'll note that we have received many questions from residents in advance of this meeting, but you can also type in your questions in the Q&A box on your screen. We'll try to alternate between questions that were submitted earlier and new questions as they come in. I'll try to answer as many questions as possible with support from our CAO, Lisa de Soto. However, we may not be able to answer all questions that we receive today. Remember that you can always go to our website for more information at canmore.ca/COVID. And as a reminder, I know that you all have concerns, but there are real humans on the other end of your screen. While welcoming differences in opinions, we all need to treat each other with respect. And with that, I'll ask Ms. Dinage to provide the first question.
Thank you, Mayor Borrowman. The first question today comes in from Carol, and she is asking, what does it mean to have activated the ECC, or the Emergency Coordination Center?
And that's a really good question, Carol. So the ECC is activated whenever something should happen in the town that may present a threat to our community. And a clear example of that was the flood. That was kind of clear. So the operation of the ECC is managed under provincial regulations and also under our own emergency management plan. And I want to be clear that local elected officials are not a part of the Emergency Coordination Center. So they keep us electeds out of that conversation, and for good reason. And it's also important to note that an Emergency Coordination Center has the authority to implement certain powers outside of the Municipal Government Act, as long as they're in keeping with the Provincial Local Emergency Management Act. I hope that answers your question, Carol.
Thank you, Mayor Borrowman. The next question comes from Jean, and she asks, what exactly does a state of local emergency mean in Kenmore?
Well, under a state of local emergency, we do have the increased authority to take additional measures in response to what we're seeing happening and measures to protect our community. So while the SOL does, that's the State of Local Emergency, acronym SOL, does allow us to take additional actions that are outside of the MGA, does not allow us to do things like close the provincial highways, because that's under provincial jurisdiction. But a state of local emergency does expand fairly significantly some of the things that can be done by a municipality. And a good example, again, from the flood of 2013 was not so much here in Canmore, but in High River. I know that they were using their soul to allow entry into private residences, looking for various things that they were looking for. So property rights are changed under a state of local emergency. Does that, well, I won't know if that answers Jean's question, but I hope it does.
Thank you, Mayor Borrowman. We're going to move to some of the live online questions now. Just as a quick update, we have about 148 people currently logged in and participating in today's virtual town hall. I do want to start with one of a comment that has come in. I just wanted to pass this along. It says, your efforts and those of council and staff are appreciated by all. So thank you very much, Nick, for that. And the next question is from John, and his question is, thank you for your time today. Does the town of Kenmore have any plans to modify the position on being closed if the province decides to soften its position?
Really good question. We're always prepared to reconsider the position we've taken in response to changing conditions, absolutely. So while I've noted that we're not putting up blockades at this time, if the advice from the provincial or federal health authorities should suggest otherwise, we would certainly be following that advice. We all know that as the weather improves, that we're likely to see increased numbers of visitors coming out to the mountains. We will be there will be a briefing report at council this Tuesday that will just begin to start the conversation about what it will look like for the town of Kenmore to start to open up again. So I would encourage the questioner and others listening to try to tune into the council meeting on Tuesday. And if you can't, you can watch the recorded version afterwards. But this is certainly a topic of great conversation in the town is what's next.
Great. The next question comes from Janine, and she asks, given that none of us know what our properties are now worth in this struggling economy, will the council consider rolling back 2020 increases to the previous year's amounts?
And yes, Janine, I spoke briefly to that in earlier, but we have directed administration to come back to council with a number of recommendations for us to consider, one of which will be to meet our intent of reducing the 2020 tax requirements back to what they were in 2019. So I think you'll be able to see that happen. Well, we're hoping by late May it'll be back to council, but I can't give a date.
Okay, the next question is from John, and he asks, what has the town of Kenmore done to relieve its financial outlay during these challenging times?
Well, the most obvious thing that we've done is lay off 40% of our staff, as I mentioned earlier, and it's always a hard thing to do, of course. And I'm going to go out on a limb and think that was about a $600,000 reduction. The CAO can jump in and correct me on that. But the counterpoint to that, of course, is the reason that we did lay off so many staff was our rec centers were closed. So the trade-off, although we're finding budget savings from some of those actions, we also have deficits because there's no revenue coming in from Elevation Place and the rec center. I don't know if the CAO has another specific example of what we're doing. She could jump in at this time. And
I'm here.
There you are.
There, can you hear me?
Right.
Okay. So the only things I would add to that, Mayor Borrowman, are that we've taken a look at all our vacant positions and have suspended hiring of any vacant or new positions. We've also reduced our seasonal employee complement significantly. We normally bring in about 25 to 30 park staff, and we're only bringing in the bare minimum, around 10. And certainly all of our recreation staff, day camp staff, and that type of thing will also be impacted. There are a number of contracts, custodial services, for example, and other savings within the building maintenance department that have reduced expenditures in that area. But one of the things we've also done is advanced our maintenance activities, both at Elevation Place and the Canmore Rec Center, where we normally drain the pool in September and do all those maintenance activities and take out the ice in the summer. We're doing that now. So in expectation of reopening, we won't have to close again, and we can maximize any revenues from rentals or memberships once we reopen. So that's some of the other actions we've taken.
Thank you, Ms. De Soto.
Great, on to the next question. Along the same veins, Carol is asking, has council considered a reduction in spending budget for their own compensation?
And Carol, that's also a very good question. And yes, we have had that discussion at the recent meeting of council, and that would be one component of reducing the overall budget when that comes back to council for consideration. I've committed to reducing the mayor's salary by the same extent as may be applied to other working staff. And of course, it would be up to individual councillors to weigh in on that. But if there are, if we're asking our staff to take reduction in wages, then certainly I will be as well.
Thank you. They're along the same veins. Nick is asking, did the town apply for federal assistance to help the laid off town staff employees?
Not that I'm aware of, but again, I'll look to the CAO. I know that the number of the staff that have been laid off qualify, and I would hope are receiving employment insurance payments. There's certainly been some discussion at the provincial level. I sit in on weekly meetings with the Premier and other elected officials, and the province is talking about putting things in funding in place for municipalities that would be easily accessible and without a terrible number of restrictions on the money. One example is every year we receive what's called the Msi Fund, or Municipal Sustainability Initiative grant funding. For instance, it was largely MSI funding that built Elevation Place. So municipalities depend on that sharing of provincial revenues. There's been a suggestion that the province double the annual contribution to all municipalities. That would be really helpful. So if you have the ear of the MLA, I would ask you to speak with her and support that or any other opportunity that the province is considering for financial supports going to municipal governments. Ms. De Soto, do you have anything to add?
Sorry, I would just add that for our staff, I believe the questioner was asking about, did we apply to support our staff? And there was no process for us to do that. Each staff member has to apply directly for employment insurance, as you mentioned, Mayor Borrowman. And there is a large lobby effort underway by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to have the federal government support loss in tax revenue. There's been no program announced for that, but as soon as that announcement comes out, or should the federal government provide that support, we will certainly be applying. And then you're very correct around the MSI increases. That is something that we're actively waiting to hear more about from the province, and we are preparing a list of shovel-ready projects that we would be able to move forward with as soon as the province announced any kind of grant funding that would be available.
Thank you. And I apologize to the questioner for I misunderstood the thrust of his question. I answered what I thought was the question. One way or the other, I hope we've answered your question, sir.
I believe that you have. Just keeping with the theme of budget, I'm skipping ahead to another question. And I will say that a number of our questions that we've received are the same, although they may have been worded differently. And in some cases, there was quite a long preamble to the question. So for the sake of brevity, I'm going to try and get right to the heart of the question so that Mayor Borrowman can answer as many of your questions as possible. So this is a question about budget. So knowing that we need to show restraint and fiscal responsibility, is the town of Kenmore planning to eliminate budgets and planning scenarios because Alberta and Bow Valley tourism is about to enter a long recession? There's a number of parts to this. Will there be any removal from the budget for community art installations? Or removing the term life cycle as a justification for buying new equipment?
The short answer is yes, everything will be on the table. It's too early for me to say specifically what tools will apply, but we're looking for supportable savings right across the board. And as an example, we do fund a number of other organizations that are our affiliates, like the museum and the library and arts place, and I expect we'll be asking those boards to reduce their requests for 2020. Again, most of this conversation hasn't happened yet, well, at least not at council. It's certainly been happening at the administrative level for well over a month. Each department has been going through their departmental budgets literally with a fine-tooth comb, looking for every possible reduction. So I'll be able to answer that question a little more definitively once the report is to council around the reduction in 2020 expenses. Again, I'll ask the CAO to pipe in with any specific examples of what we might see happen there.
Thank you, Mayor Borrowman. The only thing I would add to your explanation is that we certainly are looking at all of our contracted services, our purchases and supplies. When we budgeted for 2020, for example, fuel was at a different rate than it currently is. So we're looking to put a COVID-19 lens on all of our purchases. Also looking to restrict any kind of purchases made from the US because of our change in exchange rate, those kinds of things. And with the capital program, we have a decision-making lens. We're looking through every capital project, looking at are there grants that we currently have that are supporting this capital project installation, and will those grants go away if we didn't implement it now? Have we already seen some expenditures that would require us to proceed with that project? Or is there a real strong justification to proceed with a capital project because of the reduction in traffic that we have right now, and because construction also puts people, Canmore residents, to work and keeps them gainfully employed? So we are looking at all of those aspects around our capital plan as well.
Thank you very much. And I will note that this is not a quick or easy conversation to have, because we do want to protect essential services. And I know our residents do as well. We want to make sure that water continues to flow and that the garbage is picked up and all of those those important components of community life, our fire and our police coverage. So you should understand we will be looking at every possible amendment that will affect the expenses for our residents.
Okay, moving on to a question that I know many people have asked. So some people are concerned, or some people have expressed concern about visitors, day trippers, and weekend homeowners coming to Canmore. Please describe Canmore's decision to not control access and turn people away, and how does this compare to other mountain towns? For example, Banff is doing it.
Okay, well, bear with me because I have a fairly lengthy answer to that question. And we've been talking about this both at the town and in the community for a very long time. And I did note earlier that we can't be making decisions based on emotion or fear. And I know there is a lot of that in our community right now. We don't know what's happening. We don't know what to expect, and we don't know if somebody coming down the street that we don't recognize is carrying the virus and is going to infect us. And that's why we've taken a very strong stand on following the provincial orders on restrictions. And we're following all of the guidance that we receive from all levels of medical authorities. And I did note that that although Dr. Hinshaw and other provincial authorities continue to discourage non-essential travel, as do we, traveling between communities has not been prohibited by any authority. And we've been directed specifically by the provincial government to exercise proper balance in regards to respecting the fundamental rights of the public. And these fundamental rights include the right of movement and the right of access to one's personal property. So I know that there's concern and people are upset about our second homeowners coming and using their properties, but unless there's very specific order in council or regulations from the province saying that people are not able to travel to their other homes, they have property rights and they have the right of travel. And I'll note a comment that was received by the town yesterday afternoon on a teleconference call with the Provincial Emergency Operations Center. And this is directly from the province. While there is a recommendation to avoid unnecessary travel, there is no public health order restricting travel. Restricting people's movement is a tricky balancing of rights. And as long as visitors respect public health orders with respect to social distancing and group size, then their movements should not be restricted. That's what we've just received yesterday from the province of Alberta. That being said, if we should, for any reason, feel that we should reconsider our position, we would be quite likely seeking legal advice before restricting movement. So just to summarize what I've been trying to say, there really are three main considerations. So with no provincial restrictions against travel, establishing blockades and turning people away would seem to be outside of the law. I know people are looking at the example in the town of Banff. Kenmore is a far larger community than Banff, and erecting blockades would create significant interruptions for our own residents as they travel daily throughout the town. And frankly, creating a blockade just for the optics is simply not a good decision. So I hope that helps you understand the position that the town of Kenmore is taking on this matter.
Thank you, Mayor Borrowman. The next question is somewhat related. Chris is asking, would you please give your views and expectations on cross-border travel between Alberta and British Columbia for personal and recreation purposes once current restrictions ease up? And as each of the provinces eases, do you expect them to integrate and co-coordinate this on this and on similar issues? And as Canmore's Please Don't Come Now guidance also eases, do you expect that future guidance becomes origin within Canada driven?
Well, everything that the questioner has suggested, I think are good suggestions. And I would certainly hope that there's strong coordination between the provincial governments, BC and Alberta particularly, on these matters. We know there's very fluid back and forth across the BC border in this part of the country. But those are provincial decisions, and we won't be able to influence outside of the town of Kenmore those decisions. If the sense of the question is how will we respond locally when either the Alberta government or the BC government or both loosen restrictions, I can't answer that question with real certainty until I know the actual situation. As with all of these things, we're taking everything one step at a time, moving slowly through a very difficult process without any background or history on the part of any of us as to what's going to happen next. And we can't think back, say, oh, you know, when this happened in '94, this is what we did. We can't do that. So we'll continue to make our decisions as best possible with the full interest of our residents uppermost in our minds.
Thank you. The next questions have a common theme about second homeowners, and they come from Lindsay and Charlene, and I'm going to merge them together. Many tourists or many owners of second homes are being harassed by locals. What is Kenmore doing to be careful not to ruin its reputation as being a great place to visit? And if the request is not to come to our homes in Kenmore, will you be providing some sort of break or rebate on our property taxes? My expenses are the same, yet I am shamed for being in my own Kenmore home.
Yeah, again, a very complex situation. So firstly, I'll reiterate once more that there are no restrictions against second homeowners from coming and using their homes. There is strong encouragement, urging on the part of the province and the town of Kenmore for second homeowners to follow the same guidelines if they should choose to be in their homes. But we recognize that second homeowners are, firstly, they're an important part of our community. As you noted, as a second homeowner, you're contributing your tax dollars that help all of us here in the town of Kenmore. I'm really, really, really discouraged at some of the stories I've heard of really inappropriate actions directed towards presumed others, people that may have, for whatever reason, a local resident thinks they're looking at or talking to somebody from out of town, and there's terrible invective being hurled. Heard of vandalism occurring to people's cars because they had an out-of-province license plate. We can do a lot better than this here in the town of Kenmore. We can be a welcoming community to everybody, and particularly to our fellow Kenmore residents who may not live here full-time. It's really critical that everybody follows the direction of the public health authority and keeps the social distancing. Wash your hands, do all of those things that we know you're supposed to do. But for the love of God, treat people nicely. Don't be hurling abuse at people. I better stop there.
Thank you, Mayor Borrowman. Can you please explain why the parking lots at Cougar Creek, Quarry Lake, and Lady Mcdonald are still open while provincial and national parks have closed their access? And that's been a common question, and Deborah and Sean asked about that.
Yeah, Again, good questions. Again, I want to note how important it is for our residents to get out into into our town, use our trails and get out, get some fresh air, get some sunshine. This is how we're going to maintain our sanity. So firstly, from the town's perspective, it's important that we can continue to allow access to those trails. And we'll continue to enforce, if we have to, the public distancing, the physical distancing guidelines on the trails. I presume that the province and the federal government closed trails in their parks to reduce the number of people moving around the region. But it's really important to remember that there are 14,000 Canmore residents. Most of us, many of us are at home 7 days a week. And we have to get out, and maybe we're going out to use the trail at I don't know, 2 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon instead of only on Saturdays and Sundays. So just be patient and don't assume that people you see on the trails are outsiders. But in the meantime, we have installed no parking and local traffic only signs at the main trailheads and in the residential areas adjacent to the trailheads. And bylaw services are monitoring those key trailhead parking lots to ensure that they're not overflowing, and they are issuing tickets, parking tickets in areas that are clearly posted as no parking. So the town continues to monitor the situation and enforce regulations and guidelines as required, but we do want to allow for the health of our residents. We do want to be able to, we want to allow them to be able to access those trails.
Thank you. This question takes a bit of a different turn. Carol and Susan are both asking, in light of the Nova Scotia tragedy and last Saturday night's unsubstantiated complaint of an active shooter, can you please explain the various processes to alert the public about an emergency, such as a fire, a flood, or other imminent danger to residents of Kenmore?
Mm-hmm. What a bizarre evening that was for everybody. Firstly, I would expect the organization that's responsible for mitigating the emergency, if there actually is an emergency, to issue an Alberta emergency alert. And likely this would normally be the RCMP. And I think most everybody who's listening is aware of the Alberta emergency alert system, where you can have it on your cell phone and it sends off an alarm. But these alerts are generally used when there's an immediate or life-threatening danger, and sometimes when there's no specific action to take. And alerts will also appear on television, radio, social media, a number of other locations. But in the case of the town, we'll use all of our informational channels that we have at our disposal, websites, social media, news outlets, to spread the word if there is an emergency occurring. And for those of you that were here in 2013, you will remember very clearly how great a job the town did of keeping everybody aware on an hour-by-hour and day-to-day basis of that emergency. And just on that note, I should point out that every year at this time of year, the town does monitor snowpacks and addresses flood potential. And there's a weekly report that's issued and it's available on our website under seasonal high water monitoring.
Thank you, Mayor Borrowman. This question is from Donna. She is wondering about, instead of just closing the basketball courts and the disc golf course entirely, just because people aren't following social distancing, couldn't we just do spot checks instead to make sure that they're safe for everyone using them?
That's probably a question for the CAO. I know she was just on a conversation earlier about provincial thinking moving forward on rec facilities. So I'll ask the CAO to answer that question.
Thanks, Mayor Borrowman. Yes, we recently, just today, received an order from our local public health office that we keep our ball courts, so that's tennis courts and basketball courts, closed. There are too many common touch surfaces with the number of times people touch balls, for example, to be certain that we can safely prevent the spread. So those are two of our outdoor recreational areas that will have to remain closed until further notice from the Public Health Authority.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. The next question is around our economic recovery. And John is asking, in a recent letter from MLA Miranda Rosen, it was suggested that between 20 and 50% of small businesses in the Bow Valley could be bankrupt by July. Does the town have a plan to help prevent this or help these businesses reduce their costs or increasing their revenues?
Well, we feel firsthand that very difficult impact on small businesses. And when in fact I've made my living prior to being in the elected position as a very small business owner for 45 years here in Kenmore, and of course the pottery studio that my daughter now runs has been directly affected by this. So we do know that there's pain out there, and we are doing what we can to ease the pain or to address the financial needs of small businesses. We just approved recently, we just approved $50,000 worth of funding for Tourism Kenmore Kananaskis that is designated to co-develop an economic recovery strategy to get Kenmore back on its feet. The Town of Kenmore Economic Development Team is also working tirelessly with our local business owners to provide them with information and supports to get them through this time. We launched an online business hub with free webinar series to support businesses, and you can learn more about that at canmore.ca/COVID. And again, I would encourage people to tune in to the council meeting next week, where there will be the briefing report on how we might start planning reopening. And reopening it's a broad thing, but it's reopening our community to our own residents so we can move more freely around, but also with our primary economy as tourism, we have to be thinking about how we are able to start letting those businesses, small businesses particularly, that have been really hit, how can we slowly allow the business to start increasing, so hopefully they'll be able to stay in business past this COVID situation.
Thank you. I will note that we are about 3/4 of the way through our time today, and I still have about 10 questions in the queue, hoping we can get to most of them, or at least touch on the themes of them. So Mayor Borrowman, you just alluded to as we reopen. Is there any update you can give us? Ken is asking about this, on the plans that the town has. Should visitor traffic or volumes in town escalate as we move into the warmer weather and summer months?
I don't want to be appearing to be sloughing off answers or repeating myself, but to be honest, the last month has been focused on literally dealing with what's happening on the ground now. There have been discussions at administration level around that question that was just asked, and I expect to see much more discussion coming forward in the public over the next several weeks, both at council meetings and through general information. I'm not sure I hit the question directly, Ms. Dinaj. Can you rephrase it if there was something I missed?
It's really about the update on our plans. So our reopening plans that I think Ms. De Soto was even referencing earlier as the Emergency Coordination Center turns our minds towards that.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's just a little early to say with any certainty what the reopening plans will be, but rest assured that the conversations are underway. I know the Kenmore Business Association, which is a collective of basically represents all businesses in town, that have been working already on developing their plan. And the town of Kenmore will be working with the CBA to assist with the business community's planning, and we'll also be working, taking a lead on more town-focused activities to help reopen our community.
Thank you. I think the sentiment was generally around, as people start to come back or start to visit the community, whether it's day trippers or not, that how are we going to deal with that even before we have plans for reopening?
Okay, and that's also serious consideration. And I've had just brief conversations with senior admin, talking about possibility of trying to control movement on Main Street, for instance, and making sure that people aren't grouping up or clumping together. Honestly, I don't have the answers at this point, but we'll develop those answers very soon.
Yes, and when we do, we'll be sure to communicate them to the public.
Right.
On to a new question from Martin, acknowledging we've been making decisions on a month-to-month basis. Now that the provincial health officer's statements that all summer events are canceled, are there any parts of our events, for example, the fireworks on Canada Day, that might move forward, even though we know that pretty much everything through mid to late September will be canceled?
Yeah, that suggests an interesting possibility. Just as I was listening, I mean, arguably you could have fireworks without people there, because I always look at the fireworks from some distance. But at this point, I don't think there's very much in the way. We're not going to have a parade. That's not going to happen. I believe that arts and special events are trying to put together some ways of celebrating July 1st, Canada Day, in town of Kenmore. And once again, I'll just have to encourage people to keep checking the town website and looking for the information as it develops as soon as possible.
Thank you. Craig is asking, will the town consider reducing the municipal portion of property taxes for vacation homes to be in line with residential rates while the visitation is actively being discouraged?
No, I don't think so. I assume that the questioner is talking about short-term rentals as opposed to second homes. And short-term rentals fall under the same larger group of essential services as hotels and motels. And I know that there are some rentals occurring with short-term rentals, but no, we're not talking about changing the mill rate for a specific class of taxpayer at this time. There's certainly interest from other large groups. The hotel group, for instance, are asking if the town will manipulate the mill rates to reduce the tax burden on hoteliers this year. But if we reduce the mill rate for one class of taxpayer, that only means it goes up for the other class. So by reducing for tourist homes, for instance, then it means the residential taxpayers have to pay more. So that's it's not something that I expect to see happen, although it may. I don't know. We'll see what comes forward for council's consideration in the near future.
Thank you. The next question is, will the Kenmore Farmers Market be open this year?
My guess is it won't, but I haven't heard with any certainty on that.
Okay. The next question is from VJ. He's asking if we can provide local statistics and modeling as we reopen so the community is aware of the local COVID risks rather than what is just going on in Calgary. Could this include new cases in the hospital, the seniors' home, and businesses?
Well, we are tracking the local statistics as best possible, and I'm sure the questioner knows that every day the province updates the COVID statistics online, and you can see the number of identified cases in the Kenmore region. I can assure the listeners that at the Seniors Lodge and Bow River Seniors Lodge, and I believe Origins as well, they're really, really well managed at this time. There's very little concern at this time around exposure to the residents in those locations. So we are tracking as best possible the current cases and the changing of those cases. My primary source of information continues to be, one of my primary sources continues to be Dr. Wickham, as I mentioned earlier, the manager of emergency services at the hospital. And he told me just a couple of days ago that it's been very quiet at the Kenmore Hospital all through this in regards to COVID. And they're starting to reschedule regular medical issues at the hospital now. So, but yes, we'll be tracking all the data that we can.
Thank you. Karen is asking, what action is the town of Kenmore considering to protect the mental health of residents and alleviate issues that are starting to arise due to the lockdown? And she's looking for initiatives beyond what the small and mighty staff of Family and Community Support Services can personally accomplish.
Well, that's the department of the town that does the work of helping people that are dealing with mental stress. So all of the work through the town that's addressing that very serious challenge, and it is very serious, will come through FCSS, and they're working on a number of possible programs that they'll be bringing to council for funding. I mentioned earlier the $4 million that we now have in the tax stabilization reserve as one source of funding for programs that might come along like that we haven't funded in the past. But all of council and administration is very aware that people's stress levels are very elevated, and we'll be doing all we can through FCSS to help people and reduce their stress levels.
Thank you. The next question is about enforcing COVID infractions. Will the town of Kenmore community peace officers be out issuing fines for COVID infraction?
Unless it's changed very recently, our bylaw officers there's different levels, and I think ours are CPO 3s or something. Again, Ms. De Soto can jump in. So in Canmore, the RCMP, I believe, are the only authority to enforce on those regulations. I don't think bylaw can yet. Is there a change in that, Ms. De Soto?
No, Mayor Borrowman, there is no change in that. The provincial legislations allows community peace officer level 1s to enforce those public health orders. Unfortunately, our bylaw staff do not have that designation and so are not able to enforce that. But you're very right, the RCMP can issue fines if needed. And
I'm sure the listeners know that there is a complaint line, if you will, available online at the Alberta government sites on COVID, that if you see an infraction, ongoing infraction, you can file an official complaint. But if it's just an instance that's happening as you're walking down the street, I would suggest you call the RCMP.
Thank you. I do know that our bylaw officers are out doing quite an education campaign and monitoring the trails. And if anyone is looking for the information on submitting a complaint, you can just go to canmore.ca/COVID and click on our frequently asked question page, and you'll find the link to that information there. The next question is, will the parks be mowed and elk poop be cleaned from soccer fields and public grounds, etc.? What is the outdoor play strategy?
Yeah, well, my understanding at this time is that ball sports are not in the early stage of when the province is talking about reopening, that ball sports are not amongst the sports that will be permitted. So I don't know if soccer or football will be happening in the near future, but again, I'm going to ask Ms. De Soto to weigh in because she just had that conversation before this meeting. But at all times, I mean, we will continue to maintain our parks as we always do, even though we may have reduced staff. The important work that's done to keep all of our facilities up to snuff will happen. Ms. De Soto?
Yes, Mayor Borrowman, you're quite correct. So the ball activities are not going to be, and organized activities, teams, for example, will not be permitted. And most of our leagues and organizations have suspended their operations for the time being. But we do have a skeleton parks crew that will be working all summer and will be mowing facilities. And part of that mowing and prepping facilities is aerating the fields and removing the elk poop. So we will get around to doing that. It may take us longer this year with less staff, but we will get around to doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question is from Josiah, and he's wondering if there are plans to offer more formal supports to emergent organizations responding to COVID that want to provide volunteer opportunities to people looking for things to help.
I know that there already are a number of organizations that are putting funding in place to address that need, and I'm thinking specifically of the Bow Valley Community Foundation. I believe they're issuing grants to nonprofits and other groups, and the Kenmore Rotary has been putting together a fairly significant funding campaign that I understand it can be approached by groups that are looking to do positive things in the community and just need some funding. At this point, that hasn't been an integral part of the town's planning in regards to funding organizations or nonprofits, although we do have every year a community grant program. And if I recall the last conversation, we had talked about opening that community grant program up so that groups such as the questioner has just described would qualify. So stay tuned for information on that again on our website around community grants. In the meantime, have a look at what Kenmore Rotary is doing and the Bow Valley Community Foundation.
Thank you. I am aware of the time that it's 4 o'clock, and I know you still have a few closing remarks to give Mayor Borrowman. I know we also didn't get to all of the questions today. Hopefully we touched on the themes that were top of mind for most people, so I apologize for not being able to get to all of the questions. There were just a few last comments coming in, thanking you and town administration for making this happen and for a job well done during these trying times. I wanted to pass those along before you make your closing remarks.
And that's really great to hear. I do appreciate that, and I know that council will hear those comments as well. And honestly, you know, when I'm out about in the community, I will often hear positive feedback from our residents, which is encouraging. As the listeners might imagine, being in the hot seat as either a mayor or the councillor means you typically we're we get a lot of concerned comments and sometimes angry comments. And I always take heart in knowing that we're making the decisions based on information and really careful consideration. And everything that council does and has been doing, I'm very supportive. I'm quite happy to stand up and say, yep, council's making the right decisions. But thank you for those comments. So as you noted, this does bring us to the end of today's session. And from my perspective, it was very interesting. I would hope that we would find opportunities to do something similar again. But thank you all for taking the time to join us on our first virtual town hall. There were a number of really great questions, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to be involved today as engaged citizens in our little democracy here. We couldn't answer all of your questions. I apologize for that. But you can always find more information on our website, and I've said this a few times, canmore.ca/COVID. You can also contact our community call center Monday through Friday at 403-678-1551 or by email at askus@canmore.ca. And we will be posting a recording of this meeting for anyone that missed it, or if you want to look at it again, on our Town of Kenmore YouTube page. So again, thank you for your time. And as I sign off, I'd like to remind everyone that our individual actions do matter during this time. Please be kind to each other, and as always, stay safe. Thank you.